My name is Iola Sanders. I'm 57 years old, and today I buried my only son, Brandon. He was 34, successful, kind, and my whole world. As I stood by his casket, my husband Harold approached me, not with comfort, but with divorce papers. Now, nothing ties me to you anymore, he said coldly. I'm taking over Brandon's business and house. You can stay until I return from vacation. What Harold didn't know was that I had already secured my future. If you're watching this from somewhere that's experienced loss or betrayal, please subscribe and share your story below. Let me take you back to where it all began. I met Harold Thompson when I was 22 years old. It was 1989 and I had just graduated with honors in accounting from the University of Michigan. I was working at my first job at a respected accounting firm in Chicago, feeling proud of my independence and excited about my future. Harold was 25, studying for his MBA, and he swept me off my feet with his confidence and ambitious plans. Harold was classically handsome, with dark hair, blue eyes, and the kind of smile that made everyone in the room feel special. When we met at a mutual friend's dinner party, he spent the entire evening focused solely on me, asking about my career goals and sharing his dreams of starting his own investment firm. I was flattered by his attention and impressed by his charisma. You're different from other women I've met, Harold told me on our third date. You understand business and have ambition. We could build something amazing together. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Within 6 months, Harold proposed with a diamond ring that I later discovered he'd purchased on credit. We married 3 months later in a ceremony that was larger and more extravagant than I had wanted, but Harold insisted it was important to start as we meant to go on. My parents had reservations about the speed of our relationship. My father, a high school mathematics teacher, took me aside before the wedding. Iola, honey, are you sure about this? You've worked so hard to build your career. You barely know this man. But I was in love and confident that I had found my partner in life. Dad, Harold supports my career. We're going to be equals in this marriage. Brandon came along 2 years after we married. The pregnancy was unexpected but welcome. I had always wanted children, and Harold seemed excited about becoming a father. He painted the nursery himself and spent hours assembling the crib, refusing my offers to help. This is my job as the man of the house, he said, and I found his traditional attitude endearing at the time. But something shifted after Brandon was born. Harold's attitude toward me changed in subtle ways that were difficult to pinpoint. He began questioning my parenting decisions, suggesting I was either too lenient or too strict with Brandon. He complained about the meals I prepared while juggling my accounting job and new motherhood. The compliments about my intelligence that had once flowed freely dried up and were replaced with criticisms. Meanwhile, Harold's own career plans weren't materializing as he'd hoped. His attempts to launch his investment consulting business repeatedly failed to gain traction. Potential investors weren't impressed with his business plans, and clients were scarce. His frustration grew, and increasingly, I became the target of it. If you were more supportive, I could focus better on building my business, he would say when another prospect fell through. Other successful men have wives who put their husbands' careers first. When Brandon was 3, Harold convinced me to quit my job. I was already on the path to becoming a senior accountant with a significant salary increase on the horizon. Brandon needs his mother at home, Harold argued, and I need you to help me with the administrative side of my business. It will just be temporary until things take off. Against my better judgment, I resigned from my position. My boss expressed disappointment and told me the door would always be open for my return. But as the years passed, that door closed, as the firm evolved, and my skills became outdated without continuing education and experience. At home, I took over all childcare, household management, and the bookkeeping for Harold's struggling business. Despite my accounting expertise, Harold dismissed my strategic suggestions for his company. Just handle the numbers, Iola. Leave the business strategy to me, he would say, with a patronizing pat on my shoulder. To the outside world, we presented as the perfect family. Harold was charming at neighborhood gatherings and Brandon's school events. He spoke proudly of his supportive wife and boasted about being the provider, even though our lifestyle was primarily sustained by my savings and later loans against our house. Brandon grew up watching this dynamic. He was a perceptive child, and I often caught him observing the interactions between his father and me, with a thoughtful expression that seemed too mature for his young face. Harold's manipulation was subtle. He never raised his hand to me, which allowed him to maintain the fiction that he was a good husband. But he controlled our finances, criticized me constantly, and isolated me from friends and family through a combination of scheduling conflicts and subtle remarques that made me reluctant to invite people into our home. "Your friend Susan seems very judgmental," he would say after one of my former colleagues visited. "And did you notice how she was flirting with me? It's probably better if we don't have her over again." I stayed in the marriage for Brandon's sake, telling myself that children need both parents and that things would improve once Harold's business succeeded. I made excuses for Harold's behavior, convincing myself that he was just stressed about work and that his criticism was his way of pushing me to be better. Looking back, I'm ashamed of how many red flags I ignored. The way Harold would check the mileage on my car and question every purchase I made. How he would remind me that I had no recent work experience whenever I talked about returning to my career. The way he would lavish praise on me in public, but tear me down in private. Despite growing up in this environment, Brandon developed into a kind and empathetic boy. He excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and computer science. He had his father's charm, but none of his manipulation. By his teenage years, I often caught him defending me when Harold became particularly critical. "Mom works harder than anyone I know, Dad." 14-year-old Brandon said one evening after Harold complained about dinner being late. "Maybe you could help sometimes instead of just complaining." Harold didn't speak to either of us for 3 days after that incident. Brandon's natural aptitude for technology and business became evident early. While other teenagers were focused on sports and social lives, my son was teaching himself programming languages and developing apps in his bedroom. By 17, he had created a scheduling application that several local businesses adopted. Harold dismissed Brandon's early ventures. "Playing with computers isn't a real career," he told Brandon during his senior year of high school. "You should focus on getting an MBA like I did." But Brandon was determined to follow his own path. He received a full scholarship to study computer science at Stanford University. And I've never forgotten the look on Harold's face when the acceptance letter arrived. There was pride, yes, but also something else, a flash of insecurity that I hadn't seen before. When Brandon left for college, I felt both proud and bereft. My son was pursuing his dreams, but his absence left me alone with Harold and the increasingly obvious cracks in our marriage. During his freshman year at Stanford, Brandon called me every Sunday evening. Harold rarely joined these calls, claiming he was too busy with work, but I suspected he was uncomfortable with the close relationship I maintained with our son. "How's Dad treating you?" Brandon would often ask, his voice careful. "We're fine, sweetheart. Don't worry about us." I would reply, unwilling to burden him with my unhappiness. It was during his sophomore year that Brandon started his first real business from his dorm room. He identified a gap in the market for specialized software that helped small businesses manage their inventory more efficiently. Using the programming skills he'd been honing for years, he developed a solution that was more affordable and user-friendly than existing options. When Brandon called to tell us about his new venture, Harold scoffed. "That sounds like a hobby, not a business," he said. "Don't let it distract you from your studies." But Brandon proved him wrong. By the end of the school year, his software was being used by dozens of small businesses across California, generating enough income for Brandon to hire 2 fellow students as part-time employees. Over the next decade, Brandon's company, Innovate Tech Solutions, grew from a dorm room startup into a respected tech firm with offices in San Francisco and Chicago. He expanded his product line to include comprehensive business management software, tailored for various industries from retail to healthcare. As Brandon's success grew, the dynamic between him and Harold became increasingly complicated. Harold, whose own business ventures continued to struggle, began to position himself as the wise mentor behind Brandon's achievements. I always encouraged his interest in technology. I overheard Harold telling one of his golf buddies, I knew there was money in computers, so I guided him in that direction. When Brandon was 28, after securing a significant round of venture capital funding, he bought his first major purchase, a beautiful house in an upscale Chicago suburb for Harold and me. You deserve a nice place, Mom, Brandon told me when he showed us the house. You've been living in that small ranch house my whole life. Harold acted as though the gift was his due. Well, it's about time we upgraded, he said, inspecting the spacious rooms. Though I would have preferred something in the Gold Coast area. Brandon just smiled tightly and squeezed my hand. As his company flourished, Brandon became more vocal about his concerns regarding Harold's treatment of me. During his visits home, he would intervene when Harold criticized me or tried to take credit for Brandon's success. Actually, Dad, Brandon said during one particularly tense dinner, it was Mom who helped me set up my first proper accounting system. Her background in finance was invaluable. Harold's face darkened. Your mother just did what any wife and mother would do. I was the one who taught you about business strategy. Brandon started finding reasons to speak with me alone during his visits. He would suggest we go for walks or run errands together, creating private moments away from Harold's presence. During these times, he would gently probe. Mom, are you happy, really happy? I always deflected. I'm proud of you, Brandon. That's what matters. But in truth, watching my son's confidence and success highlighted my own unfulfilled potential and the years I had lost to Harold's control. Brandon seemed to sense this. It's not too late to do something for yourself, Mom. He told me during a Christmas visit when he was 30. You're only 53. You could take some courses to update your accounting skills or do something completely different if you want. His encouragement planted a seed in my mind. I began to imagine a life where I reclaimed some independence. Around this time, Brandon met Sophia Chen, a brilliant software engineer who worked for a major tech company. She was kind-driven and brought out the best in my son. I adored her from our first meeting, recognizing in her the independence and career fulfillment I had sacrificed. Harold's reaction to Sophia was telling. He was polite to her face but privately complained that she was too career-focused and questioned whether she would be a proper wife for Brandon. She'll expect Brandon to do half the housework and childcare, Harold grumbled after one of their visits. That's not how a successful man's household should run. Brandon proposed to Sophia after a year of dating. When they announced their engagement during a family dinner at our house, I was overjoyed. Harold offered congratulations that didn't quite reach his eyes. As Brandon's personal and professional life flourished, Harold's resentment grew more apparent. He would make snide remarks about lucky breaks and being in the right place at the right time to diminish Brandon's achievements. Privately, he began to pressure Brandon for investments in his latest business schemes. Your old man gave you everything, I overheard Harold saying on the phone to Brandon. Don't you think it's time you help me get my business off the ground with a real investment? The tension between father and son escalated when Brandon refused to invest in Harold's poorly conceived restaurant franchise plan. Harold didn't speak to Brandon for weeks afterward, forcing me to serve as an uncomfortable intermediary. He's just worried about making bad investments. I explained to Harold, trying to keep peace in the family. He thinks he's better than me now, Harold snapped back. He's forgotten where he came from. During this strained period, Brandon called me privately, more often checking on my well-being and subtly preparing me for a conversation I wasn't yet ready to have. Mom, you know, you always have options, right? He would say. Sophia and I have plenty of room at our place if you ever need it. I didn't acknowledge what he was really asking, but his support gave me strength as the cracks in my marriage became impossible to ignore. The first concrete evidence of Harold's betrayal came in the form of a bank statement that arrived while he was on a business trip to Milwaukee. Usually, Harold collected the mail, but I retrieved it that day and noticed an unfamiliar account statement among the bills. The statement was for a personal account in Harold's name, only containing over $75,000. I was shocked. We had been struggling to pay our mortgage, and Harold had told me we needed to cut back on expenses, including my modest weekly lunch with a neighbor that was my only regular social outing. When Harold returned, I confronted him with the statement. What is this account? Where did this money come from? Harold's face flushed with anger, not guilt. You had no right to open my mail, he snapped, snatching the paper from my hand. I'm managing our finances. Some investments need to be kept separate for tax purposes. You wouldn't understand the complexities. I'm an accountant, Harold. I understand perfectly well, and what you're doing doesn't make financial sense. You were an accountant 25 years ago. He scoffed. The field has changed. Stop questioning me and stick to what you know, keeping the house. After this confrontation, I began paying closer attention to our finances. I discovered Harold had been systematically moving money from our joint accounts into his personal accounts for years. Small amounts that wouldn't immediately raise red flags, but substantial when added together. When Brandon visited a month later, I almost told him what I'd discovered, but held back. He was excited about his company's expansion and his upcoming wedding. I didn't want to burden him with my marital problems. But Brandon noticed something was wrong. Mom, you seem distracted. Is everything okay between you and Dad? We're just going through a rough patch, I admitted. Nothing unusual after 30 years of marriage. Brandon gave me a long look. Mom, I've watched Dad undermine you my entire life. That's not a rough patch, it's a pattern. His directness startled me. I had thought I'd hidden the dysfunction of my marriage from him. But of course, he had seen everything. Around this time, I reconnected with my former colleague Diana, who had reached out via social media. We met for coffee, and it was refreshing to talk with someone from my professional past who remembered me as a capable, promising accountant, rather than just as Harold's wife or Brandon's mother. We always wondered why you never came back to the firm, Diana said. You were on track to make partner eventually. When I mentioned this conversation to Harold, his reaction was unexpectedly vicious. Diana always was jealous of you for landing a husband while she stayed single, he said, dismissively. She's probably just lonely and using you for company. Besides, no one would hire you now at your age with such outdated skills. His words stung, but they also rang false. Diana had a successful career, a happy marriage, and grown children. There was no reason for her to be jealous of me. This interaction prompted me to reach out to other former colleagues and friends I had lost touch with over the years. Through these renewed connections, I discovered something disturbing. Harold had been systematically alienating people from my life by telling them I was too busy or uninterested in maintaining friendships. Harold told us you preferred to focus on family and didn't have time for girls' nights anymore. My former friend Sarah revealed when we finally reconnected. After he turned down invitations on your behalf several times, we stopped asking. I was devastated to learn how much Harold had isolated me under the guise of protecting me. With Brandon's encouragement, I began to reclaim these lost friendships and establish a social life independent of Harold. I joined a book club, started taking weekly walks with Diana, and even explored online courses to update my accounting knowledge. Harold's response to my growing independence was to increase his controlling behaviors. He questioned where I was going, who I was meeting, and how much I was spending. He surprised me by showing up at the cafe where my book club met, claiming he was just in the neighborhood. Your friends seem very liberal, he commented afterward. I'm not sure they're a good influence on you at this stage of life. Then came the discovery that shattered any remaining illusions about my marriage. While using Harold's laptop to look up a recipe when mine was being repaired, a notification for an incoming email appeared on the screen. The preview showed a message from someone named Trisha with the words, "Can't wait to see you tonight, lover." My hands shaking, I opened Harold's email to find years of correspondence with his assistant, Trisha Davis. The emails detailed a long-term affair that had been going on for at least 7 years, including vacations taken together during Harold's supposed business trips and explicit messages about their physical relationship. I felt physically ill reading their exchanges, particularly the ones where they discussed me. "The wife is clueless as usual," Harold had written after one close call when he'd returned home late. "She believes anything I tell her." When Brandon called that evening for our weekly chat, I broke down and told him everything: the secret bank accounts, the isolation from friends, and now the affair. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Brandon finally spoke, his voice was controlled but furious. "This ends now, Mom. I'm coming home this weekend and we're going to figure this out together." True to his word, Brandon flew in from San Francisco that Friday. He stayed at a hotel rather than at our house, asking me to meet him there first to talk privately. "You need to leave him, Mom," Brandon said directly. "This isn't a healthy marriage. It's never been one. I'm 54 years old, Brandon. I haven't worked in decades. Where would I go? What would I do? You can stay with Sophia and me until you get on your feet. I have more than enough money to support you, and I know you won't take advantage. More importantly, you're smart and capable. You can build a new life." When we confronted Harold together the next day, his reaction was to deny everything, and then attack when the evidence was irrefutable. "You turned my son against me," he shouted at me, "after everything I've done for this family." "What exactly have you done for this family, Dad?" Brandon asked coldly. "Mom sacrificed her career to support you. She raised me while you were busy failing at business ventures and apparently cheating on her." Harold turned pale. "You have no right to speak to me that way. I'm your father." "Yes, you are," Brandon acknowledged. "And I've spent most of my life watching you belittle and control my mother. It stops now." Harold's expression shifted to calculation. "Brandon, son, you're only hearing one side of the story. Your mother has been difficult for years. Emotionally unstable. Ask anyone." "By anyone, do you mean the friends you deliberately kept away from, Mom? Or your girlfriend Trisha?" Brandon's voice was ice. That night, after Brandon returned to his hotel, Harold alternated between rage pleading and manipulation. He accused me of spying on him, then wept and begged forgiveness, then threatened that I would have nothing without him. "Who will want you at your age?" he sneered. "You'll die alone." For the first time in decades, his words didn't wound me. I saw them for what they were: the desperate tactics of a man who sensed his control slipping away. The next morning, I told Harold I was considering separation. He laughed. "With what money? The house is in my name. The cars are in my name. You have nothing." His confidence shook me, and I realized I needed professional advice before making any moves. When I mentioned this to Brandon the next day, he immediately offered to connect me with his company's legal team. "Take your time, Mom. Think about what you want. But know that you're not alone, and you're not without resources." As Brandon prepared to return to San Francisco, he hugged me tightly. "I'm so proud of you for standing up for yourself. Dad's been gaslighting you for years, making you think you're dependent on him, when the truth is the opposite. You're stronger than you know." His words gave me courage. For the first time in decades, I began to imagine a life free from Harold's manipulation, a life where I could rediscover the strong, capable woman I had once been. Brandon returned to San Francisco, but we spoke daily. He and Sophia were in the final stages of planning their wedding scheduled for the following spring. Their happiness gave me joy during this tumultuous time, and their support gave me strength as I quietly began making preparations for a new chapter in my life. I consulted discreetly with a divorce attorney recommended by Diana, who had gone through her own divorce years earlier. The attorney, Patricia Quinn, was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who specialized in helping women leave long-term marriages. "Your situation isn't uncommon," Patricia told me during our first meeting. Financial control and emotional manipulation are forms of abuse even without physical violence. She advised me to gather all the financial documents I could access without alerting Harold, and to start setting aside small amounts of money in a private account. I began volunteering at a community center's finance office, using the skills I had let languish for too long with the hope of building recent experience for my resume. Life settled into an uneasy rhythm. Harold seemed to sense the shift in me but couldn't quite identify what had changed. He vacillated between being unusually attentive and lashing out with criticism. I maintained a calm exterior while quietly preparing for independence. Then came the call that shattered everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was preparing dinner when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. When I answered, a solemn voice identified himself by Officer Martinez from the San Francisco Police Department. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm calling about your son, Brandon Thompson." My heart stopped. "What about Brandon? Has something happened?" "There's been a car accident, ma'am. Your son's vehicle was struck by a drunk driver who ran a red light. Brandon has been taken to San Francisco General Hospital in critical condition." The kitchen tilted around me as I gripped the counter for support. Will he? "The doctors are doing everything they can, ma'am. You should get here as soon as possible." I don't clearly remember calling Harold at his office or the frantic booking of flights. The next hours passed in a blur of panic and prayer as we flew to San Francisco. We arrived at the hospital just before midnight. The emergency room doctor, a young woman with kind eyes and an exhausted expression, met us in a private consultation room. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I'm very sorry to tell you that Brandon succumbed to his injuries 30 minutes ago. We did everything we could, but the trauma was too severe." I heard a keening sound and realized it was coming from me. The doctor continued speaking, explaining about internal bleeding and head trauma, but her words washed over me without meaning. My beautiful, brilliant son was gone. The light of my life had been extinguished by a stranger's recklessness. Harold sat beside me, silent and pale. When he finally spoke, his words chilled me. "Who has access to Brandon's financial information? I need to contact his lawyers immediately." The doctor looked taken aback. "Sir, we can discuss those matters later. Right now." "No," Harold interrupted. "As his father, I need to secure his assets before anyone else tries to claim them." I stared at my husband in disbelief. Our son's body was barely cold, and Harold was already thinking about his money. Sophia arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later, her face ravaged by tears. She had been out of town at a conference when the accident occurred and had flown back immediately upon hearing the news. When she saw me, she collapsed into my arms, and we held each other, sharing a grief too profound for words. Harold stood awkwardly to the side, making perfunctory expressions of sympathy while checking his phone. Within hours, he was making calls to Brandon's office, trying to gather information about his son's will and business holdings. The next days passed in a haze of grief and arrangements. Sophia and I worked together to plan the funeral service that would honor Brandon's memory. Harold involved himself primarily in discussions about Brandon's estate, growing increasingly agitated when he was unable to access information about Brandon's financial affairs. His assistant says she can't discuss anything without authorization from the company's legal team. Harold complained, "I'm his father, for God's sake. Everything should come to me." I was too numb with grief to fully process Harold's behavior, but Sophia noticed. One afternoon, as we sat in her and Brandon's apartment, selecting photos for the memorial service, she gently broached the subject. Brandon was worried about his father trying to take control of the company if anything ever happened to him, she said carefully. That's why he updated his will and business succession plans a few months ago. I looked up from the photo album in my lap. "What do you mean?" Sophia hesitated. "Brandon didn't want to worry you, but he didn't trust his father with the business he'd built. He made sure there were protections in place." Before I could ask more questions, my phone rang. It was Harold demanding to know when I would return to the hotel. "We need to meet with Brandon's bank today," he said, not bothering to ask how I was coping. The morning of the funeral arrived, cold and grey. I dressed mechanically, in the black dress Sophia had helped me choose my mind, struggling to accept that I was about to bury my only child. The church filled with hundreds of people whose lives Brandon had touched, employees, friends, business associates, and even recipients of his quiet philanthropy that I hadn't known about. Harold played the role of grieving father perfectly, for the public accepting condolences with a solemn nod and occasionally placing a supportive hand on my shoulder when others were watching. But when we were alone in the church antechamber before the service, his mask slipped. "I've been going through Brandon's papers at the hotel," he said. "There's no clear indication of his wishes for the company. As his father, I should step in as interim CEO until things are sorted out." I stared at him in disbelief. "Harold, we're about to bury our son. How can you be thinking about his company right now? Life goes on, Iola. Brandon would want his business protected. And as his parents, we're the natural inheritors." The service itself was a beautiful tribute to a remarkable young man. Sophia's eulogy painted a picture of Brandon's kindness, brilliance, and integrity that brought fresh tears to my eyes. Friends shared stories of his generosity and mentorship. Former classmates recalled his humble beginnings coding in his dorm room. When it was my turn to speak, I somehow found the strength to celebrate my son's life rather than just mourn his death. I spoke of his childhood curiosity, his compassion for others, and the joy he had brought into my life for 34 precious years. Harold's speech was brief and focused largely on Brandon's business success, claiming credit for instilling the entrepreneurial spirit in his son. Several of Brandon's close friends exchanged glances during these remarks. After the service, as mourners filtered out to the cemetery for the burial, Harold pulled me into an empty side room of the church. From his jacket pocket, he removed a thick envelope. "I had these drawn up yesterday," he said, handing me the envelope. "Divorce papers. Sign them now." I took the envelope with trembling hands. "You're divorcing me at our son's funeral." "Yes," Harold said coldly. "Now nothing ties me to you anymore. From now on, I will take over our son's business, including his house, where we used to live, which now belongs solely to me. You may stay until I return from the vacation I am about to take." I stared at him, the stranger I had spent 35 years with. "You're going on vacation now. I need time to process my grief," Harold said, with no trace of actual grief in his voice. "And to plan my next steps as the head of Innovate Tech. I've booked 2 weeks at that resort in Bali we always talked about visiting." "You mean the one you always said was too expensive when I suggested it?" Harold ignored my question. "Sign the papers before the burial. I want this finished today." A strange calm settled over me. I took the papers and placed them in my purse without looking at them. "I'll review them with my attorney." Harold's eyes narrowed. "What attorney? Since when do you have an attorney?" "Since I realized I was married to a man who would serve divorce papers at his son's funeral," I replied, turning to leave the room. Harold grabbed my arm. "Don't play games with me, Yola. You have nothing without me. Nothing." I gently but firmly removed his hand from my arm. "We should join the others at the cemetery. Our son deserves to have both his parents present when he's laid to rest." As I walked away, I felt Harold's glare boring into my back, but for the first time in decades, his anger held no power over me. My heart was shattered by Brandon's death, but something in me had been set free. After the burial, Harold announced to our remaining family members that he would be leaving for Bali the next morning. A necessary respite to gather my strength before taking up Brandon's business mantle, he explained with practiced solemnity. My sister Catherine, who had flown in from Michigan for the funeral, was appalled. "You're leaving Iola alone right after burying your son," she demanded. Harold's smile was thin. "Iola understands. Don't you, dear? I simply nodded, too emotionally exhausted to create a scene. Part of me was relieved that he would be gone, giving me space to grieve without managing his emotions alongside my own. Catherine insisted on staying with me in the guest house, where Harold and I had been accommodated since arriving in San Francisco. "I'm not leaving you alone right now," she said firmly, daring Harold to object. He didn't. The next morning, Harold departed for his luxury vacation without so much as a backward glance. Catherine and I spent the day resting and talking quietly about Brandon, sharing memories and tears. In the afternoon, I received a call from Jennifer Wyatt, who introduced herself as Brandon's personal attorney. "Mrs. Thompson, when you feel up to it, we need to meet regarding your son's will and estate. There are matters that require your attention." "My husband has already left for vacation," I explained. "Should we wait until he returns?" There was a pause. "Mrs. Thompson, this meeting specifically concerns you. Mr. Thompson will be contacted separately about matters that pertain to him." We arranged to meet the following day at Jennifer's office in downtown San Francisco. Catherine offered to accompany me for support, but I felt a need to handle this myself. Jennifer's office was in a sleek high-rise with views of the Bay Bridge. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her late 30s, with a direct manner that I appreciated in my fragile state. "Mrs. Thompson, first let me express my condolences. Brandon spoke of you with great affection and respect." "Thank you," I said, my voice barely steady. "He was the light of my life." Jennifer nodded sympathetically before opening a folder on her desk. "I need to inform you about the provisions Brandon made in his will and other legal arrangements. Some of this may come as a surprise." She proceeded to explain that Brandon had updated his will and company succession plans just 4 months earlier. "Brandon was very specific about the distribution of his assets," Jennifer continued. "He left 51% of Innovate Tech shares to Sophia, ensuring she has controlling interest in the company. 25% of the shares have been placed in a trust for your benefit, providing you with a substantial income for life." I blinked in surprise. "And Harold?" Jennifer's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Thompson has been left 5% of the company shares without voting rights." The implications slowly dawned on me. Harold won't be able to take control of Brandon's company. That's correct. Brandon was explicit that his father should not have decision-making authority within Innovative Tech. He appreciated his father's role in his life, but did not feel he had the right business approach to lead the company. Jennifer continued detailing other aspects of Brandon's estate. The San Francisco house had been left jointly to Sophia and me. The house Harold and I had been living in, the one Brandon had purchased for us, had been transferred solely into my name 2 months ago. Brandon also established a separate trust fund for you, independent of the company shares. This provides you with immediate access to $2 million, specifically designated for your fresh start, as Brandon phrased it. Tears filled my eyes. Even in death, my son was taking care of me, ensuring I would have the resources to live independently. "There's one more thing," Jennifer said, pulling another document from her folder. "Brandon left this letter for you to be opened in the event of his death." With trembling hands, I took the sealed envelope. Did Brandon expect something to happen to him?" Jennifer shook her head. "No, not at all. But he was a methodical person who liked to be prepared for all contingencies. Many of my clients, particularly those with significant assets, update their wills and create letters like this as a matter of prudent planning." I nodded, clutching the envelope to my chest. "Thank you for everything." "There's one final matter," Jennifer said. "Brandon was concerned about how his father might react to these arrangements. He asked me to ensure you understood that all legal measures have already been taken to secure your interests. The house title has been transferred, the trusts are established, and the company shares are allocated according to his wishes. There is nothing Mr. Thompson can do to change these arrangements." As I left Jennifer's office, I felt a complex mixture of grief and gratitude. My heart was shattered at losing Brandon, but his foresight had given me a freedom I hadn't experienced in decades. Back at the guest house, Catherine was waiting anxiously. "How did it go?" she asked as I settled onto the sofa. "Brandon took care of everything," I said. Simply then shared the details of his will. Catherine's eyes widened. "He knew, didn't he? About how Harold treated you, about what would happen if—" "He knew," I confirmed, "better than I realized." Later that evening, in the privacy of my room, I opened Brandon's letter. His familiar handwriting brought fresh tears to my eyes. "Mom, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and I'm so sorry for the pain you must be feeling. Please know that you were the light of my life, my inspiration, and my biggest supporter. I've made arrangements to ensure you'll be financially secure and independent. The house is yours. The trust fund is yours. No one, especially Dad, can take these things from you. Mom, I need you to know that I saw everything growing up, how Dad treated you, how he controlled you, how he diminished you. For years, I've worried about what would happen to you if something happened to me. I know you stayed in an unhappy marriage partly because of me, and that burden has weighed on me. Now you have choices. You can stay with Dad if that's what you truly want, but you don't have to. You can start fresh, rediscover yourself, build the life you put on hold to raise me. Whatever you choose, know that I am so proud to have been your son. Your strength, kindness, and sacrifices shaped me into the man I became. Now it's your turn to live for yourself. All my love, always, Brandon." I held the letter to my heart and wept for the son I had lost and for the decades I had lost to a controlling marriage. But amid the grief was a flicker of something I hadn't felt in many years: hope. The next day I met with Sophia to discuss practical arrangements. Despite her own overwhelming grief, she insisted on helping me navigate this transition. "Brandon and I talked about this," she revealed. "He was worried about what would happen to you if anything happened to him. He made me promise to look out for you." Together, we contacted the necessary parties to begin implementing Brandon's wishes. The lawyer who had prepared Harold's divorce papers was informed that I would be represented by my own attorney. The title to the Chicago house was confirmed to be solely in my name. Arrangements were made for my trust fund to be accessible. While Harold was still in Bali posting pictures of beaches and luxury meals on social media, with no mention of his recently deceased son, I returned to Chicago with Catherine to pack my essential belongings from the house. I didn't take everything, just clothes, personal items, and family photographs. The material possessions accumulated over decades of marriage held little value compared to my newfound freedom. I decided to temporarily move into a beautiful lakefront apartment while deciding on my next steps. The building had security which gave me peace of mind, knowing Harold couldn't simply show up unannounced. 10 days after the funeral, Harold returned from Bali tanned and expecting to take control of both Brandon's company and the divorce proceedings. I received a flurry of increasingly angry texts and calls when he discovered I had moved out and learned from his attorney that I had not signed the divorce papers. "This is your final warning, Iola," he said in his last voicemail. "Sign the papers on my terms, or I'll make sure you get nothing. Nothing." The following morning, Harold received official notification from Jennifer about Brandon's will and asset distribution. Within an hour, he was at my apartment building. Trying to get past security, his face contorted with rage when they refused him entry based on my prior instructions. Finally, I agreed to meet him in the building's conference room, with security nearby and Catherine present for support. Harold burst into the room waving papers. "What the hell is this? 5%? 5? And no voting rights. This is outrageous. I'm his father." "That was Brandon's decision," I said calmly, "as was putting the house in my name." Harold's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You manipulated him. You turned my son against me." "No, Harold. You did that all on your own." "I'll contest the will," he threatened. "I'll sue you, the company, everyone involved in this conspiracy." Jennifer had anticipated this reaction. Brandon's will is legally sound with multiple witnesses and clear documentation of his wishes. He even recorded a video statement explaining his decisions, specifically to address any potential challenges. Harold turned his attention to the divorce papers he'd served me at the funeral. Fine. Then sign these and be done with it. I slid the papers back across the table. I won't be signing your version of the divorce papers. My attorney will be in touch with yours to negotiate equitable terms. Equitable? Harold sputtered. You have nothing to negotiate with. Actually, Catherine interjected. According to these documents, Yola now has the house a trust fund and company shares worth millions. I'd say that gives her quite a bit of negotiating power. Harold's expression shifted from rage to calculation. Yola, let's talk about this reasonably. We've been married for 35 years. We just lost our son. Do we really need to end things this way? I looked at this man, this stranger who had controlled, belittled and cheated on me for decades, who had tried to abandon me at my most vulnerable moment, who had shown more concern for acquiring my son's assets than mourning his death. Yes, Harold, we do. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to the persuasive tone he had used so effectively throughout our marriage. Think about what you're doing. At your age, starting over alone. Is that really what you want? For a moment, old insecurities flickered. Then I remembered Brandon's letter. Now it's your turn to live for yourself. I'm not starting over, Harold, I said firmly. I'm finally starting. It's been 6 months since I buried my son and ended my marriage. The divorce was finalized 3 months ago with Harold finally accepting terms that were far less favorable than what he'd tried to force on me at Brandon's funeral. The house, the trust fund, and my shares in Innovatitech remained mine, with a settlement that acknowledged my contributions to our marriage despite my lack of formal employment. Grief is still my constant companion. I miss Brandon every day, with a pain that sometimes makes it hard to breathe. There are moments when I reach for the phone to call him, before remembering he's gone, and the renewed loss hits me all over again. But amid the grief, I've begun to rebuild my life. The first step was finding a grief counselor who specializes in helping parents who have lost children. Dr. Amelia Jenkins has been a compassionate guide through the darkest moments, helping me understand that grief isn't a linear journey, but a process that will always be part of me. You don't move on from grief, she told me during an early session. You move forward with it, incorporating it into your new normal. With Sophia's encouragement, I've become involved with Innovatitech's charitable foundation, helping to direct resources to educational initiatives for underprivileged students interested in technology. We established a scholarship in Brandon's name that will help young people with limited means pursue their dreams just as Brandon pursued his. Diana, my old colleague, introduced me to her accounting firm's community outreach program, where I now volunteer my financial skills to help low-income individuals and small non-profit organizations. The work is fulfilling and has helped me rebuild my professional confidence. I've maintained my relationship with Sophia, who has become like a daughter to me. We meet weekly for dinner, supporting each other through our shared grief. She's recently begun dating again a kind man who understands that her heart will always hold space for Brandon. I'm happy for her. At 32, she has so much life ahead of her. Last month, I enrolled in courses at the local community college to update my accounting certifications. At 57, I'm the oldest student in most of my classes, but the challenge of learning new skills has been invigorating. I don't plan to return to full-time work, my financial situation doesn't require it, but having current knowledge gives me more opportunities to volunteer meaningfully. My relationship with Harold has been reduced to occasional necessary communications through our attorneys. I've heard, through mutual acquaintances, that he's struggling financially as his attempts to launch new business ventures continue to fail without Brandon's success to leverage. Trisha, his long-term affair partner, left him shortly after the divorce when it became clear he wouldn't have access to Brandon's fortune. Sometimes I feel a flicker of satisfaction at Harold's comeuppance, but mostly I feel pity. He's a man who had everything that truly matters, a loving son, a loyal wife, and valued neither. Now he has neither. The hardest lesson I've learned is about forgiveness, not for Harold's sake, but for my own. Holding on to anger and resentment only keeps me tied to the past and to him. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting or excusing his behavior. It means freeing myself from its power over me. My journey from dependent wife to independent woman at this stage of life hasn't been easy. There are still days when I question my decisions or hear Harold's critical voice in my head. But those moments grow fewer as I build confidence in my choices and surround myself with supportive friends and family. I've learned that it's never too late to reclaim your life. At 57, I'm not the same woman who gave up her promising career for a controlling husband. I'm stronger, wiser, and finally living authentically. Brandon's death was the greatest tragedy of my life, but his final gift to me was freedom, not just financial security, but the opportunity to discover who I am apart from being Harold's wife. In honoring that gift, I honor my son's memory and the values he lived by: kindness, integrity, and the courage to chart your own path. If you're watching this and find yourself in a relationship where you feel diminished, controlled, or unvalued, please know that you deserve better. It's never too late to reclaim your power and your joy. The first step is the hardest, but you don't have to take it alone. I wish I could tell you that the pain of losing Brandon has lessened, but that would be a lie. What has changed is my capacity to carry that pain while still embracing life. I've learned that grief and joy can coexist, that endings can also be beginnings, and that even in our darkest moments, we can find strength we never knew we possessed. Have you ever had to start over later in life? What gave you the courage to take that first step? Please share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late for a new beginning. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, the life you deserve is waiting for you to claim it.